He is the only actor in history to be nominated for an Academy Award 12 times. 3 of those nominations turned into wins. For over 5 decades, Jack Nicholson didn't just appear in films. He redefined what American movie stars were allowed to be: dangerous, funny, unpredictable, and utterly magnetic. Now, at 89 years old, largely retired from the public eye, Nicholson's career stands as a roadmap of American cinema itself. And when you trace the films that made him who he is, 5 stand above every other credit on his resume. Films that didn't just make him famous, they changed the industry around him. This is the story of Jack Nicholson and the 5 greatest movies of his life. Let's get into it. A childhood built on a secret. John Joseph Nicholson was born on April 26, 1937, in Neptune City, New Jersey. For nearly 4 decades, Nicholson believed his grandmother, Ethel May, was his mother, and that the woman he thought was his older sister, June, was in fact his real mother. June had become pregnant with Jack at 17, and to avoid the scandal of an unwed teenage pregnancy in 1930s America, the family raised him believing Ethel and her husband were his parents. Nicholson didn't learn the truth until 1974, when a Time magazine reporter researching a profile on him uncovered the birth records. By then, June had already died in 1963, without ever telling her son the truth herself. Nicholson later said the revelation didn't devastate him the way people expected. He had, by his own account, already lived a life built on reinvention, so learning that his own origin story had been reinvented too felt, in a strange way, consistent with everything else about his life. He grew up in Neptune City with dreams that had nothing to do with acting. He was, by his own description, a class clown, a talented athlete, and a kid with no particular direction. After graduating high school, he moved to Los Angeles to visit family, and on something close to a whim, took a job as an office clerk in the animation department at MGM Studios. It was there, surrounded by people in the entertainment business, that acting started to feel like something within reach. The Corman years. Nicholson spent much of the late 1950s and 1960s working in low-budget films for director Roger Corman, a filmmaker famous for churning out cheap horror and exploitation pictures at a pace almost nobody else in Hollywood could match. Nicholson appeared in films like The Cry Baby Killer in 1958, and later The Little Shop of Horrors in 1960, taking whatever roles he could get. Here is where things get interesting. For over a decade, Nicholson was, by his own admission, a working actor with no clear path to stardom. He wrote screenplays, he took supporting parts, he nearly quit acting entirely more than once. It was a long, grinding apprenticeship, the kind Hollywood rarely talks about when celebrating its biggest stars, but one that gave Nicholson a work ethic and an understanding of independent filmmaking that would define the rest of his career. Then, in 1969, everything changed. Movie 1, Easy Rider. Nicholson was cast almost by accident in Easy Rider, a low-budget road film about 2 bikers traveling across the American South, directed by Dennis Hopper. Nicholson played George Hanson, a boozy small-town lawyer who joins the journey. The role was not originally written for him and was added relatively late in production. The film became a cultural phenomenon, capturing the counterculture movement of the late 1960s with a rawness mainstream Hollywood had never attempted. Nicholson's performance earned him his first Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actor. At 32 years old, after more than a decade of grinding through B-movies, Nicholson was suddenly one of the most talked-about new actors in America. Easy Rider didn't just launch his career, it helped launch New Hollywood itself, the era of gritty, director-driven filmmaking that would define American cinema through the 1970s, and Nicholson would become its defining leading man. Movie 2, Chinatown. In 1974, Nicholson starred in Chinatown, director Roman Polanski's neo-noir set in 1930s Los Angeles, built around a screenplay by Robert Towne, widely regarded as one of the finest ever written for American film. Nicholson played private investigator J.J. Gitz, a man who believes he understands the case he's working on right up until the moment the film reveals how wrong he's been. Now here is the wild card. Nicholson wears a bandage across his nose for a significant portion of the film, the result of a scene in which Gitz gets his nose sliced by a small-time gangster played by Polanski himself. Nicholson later called it one of the most physically demanding shoots of his career, not because of stunts, but because of the psychological intensity Polanski demanded scene after scene. Chinatown earned 11 Academy Award nominations and is regularly cited by film historians as one of the greatest screenplays ever produced in Hollywood. For Nicholson, it cemented him not just as a movie star, but as one of the most serious, dramatic actors of his generation. Movie 3, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. In 1975, Nicholson took on the role of Randall McMurphy in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, a criminal who fakes insanity to serve his sentence in a mental institution rather than prison, only to find himself trapped in a system far more brutal than he anticipated. The production was grueling. Nicholson spent time observing patients at a real psychiatric hospital in Oregon before filming began, and director Milos Forman pushed the cast through dozens of takes to capture performances stripped of any theatrical polish. The film swept the major Academy Awards categories, winning Best Picture, Best Director, Best Actress, and Best Actor, a sweep achieved by only 2 other films in Oscar history at that point. Nicholson's performance, oscillating between rebellious charisma and quiet devastation, earned him his first Academy Award. He was 38 years old. Movie 4, The Shining. In 1980, Nicholson starred as Jack Torrance in Stanley Kubrick's The Shining, an adaptation of Stephen King's novel about a writer who descends into violent madness while caretaking an isolated hotel through the winter. Kubrick's shooting process was infamous for its extremity. Actress Shelley Duvall, who played Nicholson's wife in the film, later spoke about the physical and emotional toll of Kubrick's repeated takes, some scenes shot well over 100 times. Here is the thing that puts it all in perspective. Nicholson has said that his performance drew on techniques from method acting, deliberately depriving himself of sleep during certain stretches of filming to access the character's unraveling mental state more authentically. The film was initially met with mixed reviews and even a Razzie nomination for Kubrick, but over the following decades, it was reassessed as one of the greatest horror films ever made, and Nicholson's unhinged, grinning descent into violence became one of the most imitated performances in cinema history. Movie 5, As Good as It Gets. In 1997, Nicholson closed out one of the most decorated decades of his career with As Good as It Gets, playing Melvin Udall, a misanthropic novelist living with obsessive-compulsive disorder, whose isolated life is slowly reshaped by unlikely relationships with a waitress and his gay neighbor. The role required a different kind of precision than his earlier, more explosive performances, a study in compulsive behavior and repressed vulnerability rather than raw intensity. Nicholson won his 3rd Academy Award for the role, tying him with only a handful of actors in history for total competitive Oscar wins, and confirming that even in his 60s, he remained one of the most compelling actors working in American film. Think about that, from a B-movie contract player in the late 1950s to a 3-time Academy Award winner spanning 5 decades. Nicholson's career arc mirrors the entire evolution of modern Hollywood itself. The devil behind the grin. Beyond the 5 films that defined his legacy, Nicholson built a reputation for a screen presence unlike anyone else of his generation. A raised eyebrow, a wolfish grin, a voice that could shift from playful to threatening inside a single sentence. Directors who worked with him often said the same thing. Nicholson didn't just play villains and rebels. He understood them from the inside, refusing to make them simply evil or simply charming. He insisted his characters be human first. That approach carried him through roles that could have easily become caricatures in lesser hands. As the Joker in Tim Burton's Batman in 1989, Nicholson took a comic book villain and turned him into a genuine cultural phenomenon, reportedly negotiating one of the most lucrative back-end deals in film history for the role, tied to box office and merchandise performance rather than a flat salary, a deal that would ultimately earn him tens of millions of dollars as the film became a global blockbuster. It was a masterclass not just in performance, but in understanding his own value at a moment when few actors thought to negotiate that way. In A Few Good Men in 1992, Nicholson appeared in a relatively small amount of screen time as Colonel Nathan Jessup, yet delivered a courtroom monologue, culminating in the line demanding the truth about what happened on the base. That became one of the most quoted scenes in modern film history. earning him yet another Academy Award nomination for what amounted to barely 15 minutes on screen. A legacy built on reinvention. Away from the screen, Nicholson became almost as famous for his courtside seat at Los Angeles Lakers games, a fixture at the Forum and later the Staples Center for decades, as he was for his films. He never married, though he had long relationships, most notably a 17-year on-and-off partnership with actress Angelica Houston, and he fathered children with several different partners over the course of his life. In his final decades of major film work, Nicholson continued taking on roles that surprised audiences, from the aging astronaut in Terms of Endearment, which earned him a second Academy Award, to the romantic lead in Something's Gotta Give, opposite Diane Keaton in 2003, proving that even in his 60s and 70s, he could headline films built around romance and vulnerability rather than menace. Nicholson largely stepped away from major film roles after 2010, with his last leading performance coming in How Do You Know that same year. Friends and former collaborators have described his retirement not as a dramatic exit, but as a quiet, gradual withdrawal from an industry he had already conquered several times over. A man content to watch basketball, spend time with his children, and let his body of work speak for itself. That body of work remains almost unmatched in its range. Few actors in Hollywood history have moved as fluidly between genres, from the paranoid intensity of Chinatown to the manic collapse of The Shining, to the tender vulnerability of Terms of Endearment and As Good as It Gets, to the outright menace of The Joker. Film scholars often point to Nicholson as the actor who best bridged the gap between the classic studio-era leading man and the raw, unpredictable performers who came to define American film in the decades that followed. Jack Nicholson has largely stepped away from acting in recent years, making only rare public appearances, most consistently still spotted courtside at Lakers games in Los Angeles. But the 5 films that defined his career remain fixtures of American cinema, studied in film schools, quoted in everyday conversation, and revisited by new generations discovering, for the first time, why Jack Nicholson became the actor every other actor measured themselves against. Let us know your thoughts in the comments section. And before you leave, don't forget to like this video and subscribe so you don't miss the next one.